Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone here in the Orange Tribune, Auxerre, and good evening to everyone watching from home tonight. I'm very happy to welcome you all and welcome our panelist and moderator to these BK Talks entitled Apocalypse with a question mark, an agenda for a world in crisis. I'm really happy to be finally hosting these BK Talks. It's been a hard work. We wanted to celebrate this one 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I contacted Lisa, who's here with us, who will be the moderator. And for 2 years, we have been postponing. And we've, in a way, metaphorically, we have been postponing Apocalypse. But finally, Apocalypse is happening today. So welcome to Apocalypse. Besides the joke, I think there's a lot that needs to be talked about. I started thinking about organizing these BK Talks when I was appointed curator of public programs. That day or the day after, the whole world went into lockdown. And I started wondering what was going on. And immediately I thought, what are the pressing issues besides COVID or the pandemic that we are facing? I would like to start with this image. This is a painting that probably you all know very well. This is the Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. It is now located in the Prado Museum. It's fantastic because now it starts raining as well, so it really gives a little bit more drama to the topic we are talking about. Well, this is, besides the multitude amount of interpretations that these paintings has had amongst art historians, etc., throughout history, I'm interested in this sequence now from left to right, from the creation to the paradise, and then we all humans end up in that black side of the triptych on the right, in hell because of the sins we have committed and what is it that we have done now. This is just a very superficial and, let's say, light reflection, but I really would like us to think tonight, together with our panelists, about pressing issues. No? We are in 2022, we are suffering or undergoing climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, societal inequity, political unrest, rampant urbanization, overpopulation, migration, aggressive misogyny, white supremacism, capitalist exploitation of the earth, artificial intelligence takeover, etc., etc., etc. And we are also undergoing war, which is the last, let's say, I mean, there's been war forever, no? But this time is way closer to our homes. I'm going to start with this. This was published, I think, on April 4th. I love this title. No, this has to do with the publication of the report by IPCC about climate change and the situation in which we are. Basically, the situation in which we are, I think the Guardian summarizes very well. It's now or never. Which gives food for thoughts about this idea of apocalypse that we will be discussing today. I will give Lisa Doeland the word in a minute, but I'm just trying to show you the state of things in which we are. In 2019, I was appointed deputy editor of Domus magazine in Milan, and one of the things that we immediately wanted to do was to call attention and call for action for that is happening. No? Not talking about climate change, but also biodiversity loss, sea level rise, migration behind water, the capitalist exploitation of the air, and the, let's say, relentless extraction activities on the planet that are leaving our planet looking like this, you know, like a crust full of all these pimples, how climate change is affecting simple things like going to ski this winter or not in the Alps, things like burning the rainforest in order to cultivate or to grow palm oil, production of plastic that ends up in the Pacific Ocean or everywhere, as well as the neo-colonialist exploitation of part of the planet by the next empire building all this infrastructure throughout the world in order to make our or their products reach our homes faster and faster. The fabrication of new towns all over Africa, no? Which many of them don't end up being built. No? All these new towns in Africa that are built only to make money, but that end up destroying the territories like they did already in places like Spain. This is another kind of apocalyptic landscape that have been studied for many years. No? Sorry to show you all these images. These are images of places that never were. They were started, but they were never completed. And they give us also, let's say, food for thoughts about, I don't know what apocalypse is or not, but the most important thing is to try to understand maybe who is behind this apocalyptic urbanism and apocalyptic architecture. I call it like that. And these are very famous architects, but what they did was to produce very expensive projects that were never occupied or not even used. I think that's kind of apocalyptical, and I show them here because this is what we in the end designed at Baukunde, at the Faculty of Architecture. Who's behind all those projects? I wonder, no? Or we wonder. So we also look at who's behind those projects and who are the forces financing everything that we just saw. No? They usually meet every year in winter in Davos in Switzerland. At the end of that year at Domus, anyway, we wanted to call all visionaries, and we wanted to call to imagination. And we wanted to look at what has been done by designers and what has been done by other authors in the past, and how much imagination and speculation in design can actually bring ideas about, let's say, better futures. You all know these images. We also look at what the students are producing for, let's say, better futures of China, for instance, or better futures back then for Russia. And I hope that these better futures for Russia will also come. What is being produced in the United States about futures for China, etc. In the end, what we have also done at the Y Factory here is try to send a call for action, not only to designers, but also to those who make decisions. And this is an image that we produced here together with Felix, here joining us. So in the end, very quickly, what I am trying to propose today is that maybe try to continue this triptych. If we start with creation, then paradise, then let's say apocalypse, whether we can also keep going and then do a symmetry of that and go from apocalypse to creation and to a rebirth. That's a little bit the idea behind this big talk, not only talk about the doom, but also talk about how do we maybe find solutions for what's going on. I'm going to hand in the word to Lisa Doeland, with whom I have the pleasure to have many conversations, and finally I'm meeting her in person. She's a philosopher and a lecturer at Radboud University and the UVA in Amsterdam. I also would like to thank Roy, Pinar, Felix, Naomi, and Stavros. They will be properly introduced by Lisa in a minute. So the word is yours. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Javier. I'm very happy to finally be here. I don't know, finally, the end. Not the end yet, we'll do that later. And I am very happy that we have 5 panelists here today to guide us through the apocalypse, apocalyptic feeling, apocalyptic thought. Why is it on our minds these days? But before I properly introduce you, I want to say something about how I want to structure the discussion we're going to have after, and also touch upon the announcement for this event. I reread it, and I read, I have more questions than, I have questions about the things that are, how to put this, there are certain notions that we think are evident, that are important. So the idea that humankind will prevail, this is something that is a good thing. I think a lot of panelists here today will argue that thinking in terms of the human and humankind and prevailing even might be problematic. So we'll address that. The idea that we should tackle the issues once and for all. This thinking in terms of once and for all is in a way perhaps, I don't know, kind of apocalyptic, black and white. Should we do it or shouldn't we? The idea that we should speed up agendas, is perhaps that speeding up not part of the problem? do we actually need clear guidelines for action? Is the idea that there are clear guidelines that we can follow something that got us into this mess in the first place, something to reflect on? And then finally, the idea, also very evident and very intuitively true, the idea that we're running out of time and that we must do something. But I think it's also important to reflect on this idea that we are running out of time, that it might be just in time or too late already. And yeah, see where that takes us. So loads of reflection. Of course, I'm a philosopher, so that's what I like to do. But I imagine that the panelists like that, to do that too. So we will discuss, I think, a bit about this notion of out of time via the latest IPCC report as well, and the one before that. There was a certain strand in your way of thinking that I would say is critical of modernity, of modern thought. That is also related, I think, to apocalyptic thought, so we'll take some time discussing that. Of course, we do need some clues or guidelines, so how to survive in what one of my students called the apocalyptic 20s and onwards. So what are these, I don't know, tools, ways of surviving in there? And then finally also, I don't know, on a more individual or personal level, so how do we deal with fears also? Fears of the end of our own lives, of our children's lives, of civilization. So how do we deal with these eschatological anxieties, as they are sometimes called? So yeah, we'll end with that. Kind of a positive note, maybe, at least. I don't know. The idea is that at the end of the discussion, you have some kind of takeaway. So that will be the takeaway, although it might be a bit depressing, I think. Okay, but first, I will say something about the panelists, and I have asked them all to bring something, an image, it could be an image, a meme, or even a poem, that they feel tells us something about the apocalypse. These were all images and one kind of a poem, an anti-poem. So by way of these images, they will say something about what they consider the apocalypse. And we'll start with yours. So we'll start with an image. Felix Madarasso, he is an architect, a researcher, and a lecturer, a founding father of the architecture studio IND, International Design, and also a lecturer at the Y Factory, so most of you probably know him very well. And among others, co-author of the book City Shocks, and we'll attend to this, we'll discuss this notion of shock and city shock, so I think it needs to be mentioned. The floor is yours, and I have to make sure that your image comes up. Oh, yeah, there's the image. Could you please tell us something about this image and why you chose it?
Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. This image. Should I start directly here? Probably you know this guy, no? Like, who is in the cross. You have seen him. But what is maybe interesting as a kind of reflection from this poet, or anti-poet from Chile, Nicanor Parra, which is better than Neruda, by the way, is that he makes these poems, very short poems with an image collage, and in this case it says, the one that loses wins. So it's a bit kind of interesting kind of reflection, huh? Like, what do you mean? No? Like, we always see this as the victim, but what if we need to create good and evil in order to create an agenda? What if we actually have to fabricate apocalypse to actually design something? You know, like to have to build up on crisis to create opportunities for ourselves, actually, as a matter of fact. So with these titles that Javier put in the index at the beginning, I can imagine that this could be the future departments of TU Delft, water, immigration. Well, by the way, I never thought it was a problem because I'm Mexican, but okay. And so on, you know, like, so how much we fabricate the crisis on purpose by, in order to save us. And this is, in a way, Zizek, but you are a philosopher, so probably you know better than me, obviously, thinks that all of this is connected to religion at the end, that we actually think that we needed to create this moment of salvation. And in order to do that, we need to first build up evil. We first have to build up the enemy. We have to construct, because otherwise, what are you going to be fighting against? So I'm totally supporting all these topics, and I'm fighting for preserving biodiversity and all of the topics that Javier mentions. But it's also good to think, is this the only agendas? Because if you actually ask the right-wing voters of France, it's not the same agenda. They will say, no, actually the crisis is Muslim people and black people and whatever. So they're not talking about this agenda, Javier, sorry. So it's very human at the end. We fabricate these stories also for our own benefits, to create our own jobs as well, to make purpose in our lives. So how much can we just let go? And so I came to see if I can learn something from you guys, like to see if you can help me to see if this is actually true. What is our bias to build up this crisis? What do we gain from it? Really, what do we gain from it?
Yeah, well, perhaps we gain, but we will discuss it. I don't know. We'll return to it, but we'll gain. We want to be saved. This dream of salvation that the apocalypse also offers is very powerful, of course. Yeah.
Exactly, but okay, maybe it's not my turn. You're gonna give the voice to somebody else? I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Salvation. We go back to this guy. Huh? Why we have to go back again to this guy? Couldn't we just learn from other cultures that actually learn to coexist with, like the flows of energy or whatever? Why do we always have to find an enemy, a kind of good and evil? Like, I also ask myself, because I also end up just reading the news about Russian atrocities, and I don't want to hear the Ukrainian atrocities, because I already took a side, so we take sides. It's I don't know since when. I think the Greeks were not doing that until the Christians arrived. No, don't you think?
But yeah, this is a good moment to turn to you. So to turn to Stavros Kousoulas, assistant professor also here in the architecture, philosophy and theory at the faculty at Delft. Author of several books, among others a book on architectures of life and death, which I think is very fascinating, but I'm not sure if we'll get to discussing that today. You also have shared an image with us, will share an image with us today. I'll let you introduce it. Won't say anything more.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, both Javier and Lisa. I'm going to follow some notes because I'm sure I'm not going to say even half of the things I want to say, but I'm going to keep them for later anyway. So this is a black hole image. It's the first ever image that they managed to capture a black hole. And I'm not the first one to make the argument connected to the condition that the planet is. It's Benjamin Bratton that's making the same argument. He's opening his book, Terraforming, with a reference to that image. Terraforming is a book that you could say that speaks about the apocalypse and how one could handle it. So I recommend it, even if you don't like Bratton. What Bratton is making as a comment there, and I think it's connected to the discussion today, is that this radically different image, this image is captured by the Event Horizon telescope. So it's a telescope, but it's not one telescope, it's hundreds of different telescopes that are actually dispersed throughout the planet. So in a way, the whole planet is capturing the black hole as an image. And this is exactly the opposite of the blue marble image, if you remember, in the mid-70s, where it was a picture of the Earth from space. It's no longer, let's say, the global village approach, that we are one small village and someone needs to rule it, or someone needs to create, in an hierarchical form, a certain narrative that it's supposed to be the dominant one. this is a new regime. It's a new planetary regime, no longer the small blue marble, but rather a quite complex, networked in the sense of interconnected, let's say, condition of sensing things together. And sensing things together, I mean it not just in the human sense, not like humans sensing together, but in a very extended understanding of sense. A sense that is full on technological, it's extended, and it's this sensing together that creates also a kind of idea of who we are and what we are. I'm already, I think, running perhaps out of time, but what I want to say and continue saying later on in a bit in the rest of the discussion is that eventually a discussion on the apocalypse could be understood as a discussion on how is sense governed. Because it's not a given thing. When I say sense, the French have a very nice understanding of it. Sense in French means direction. So to sense something is to perceive a direction of how things are coming your way, but also a direction of where things are going. And if we are not aware of how this sense is produced, who is in control of it, what kind of collectives it creates, then perhaps we are either mistaken or not very much aware of even the apocalyptic forms of sensing, let's say, of that end that also Felix and you were referring. A very final comment from my side. In the discussion of the Anthropocene, first you need to dismantle the anthropos, see how this is sensed and produced, and then come and discuss what is the consequences of it. Just as an example, but we will pick it up later, I hope.
Thank you. Yes, we'll sure return to the Anthropocene and also to the notion of sensing, I think. Okay. Then we will turn to Pinar Sevgatli. She is an architect. She studied here at the University of Delft. I was informed, and is now a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. And in her PhD research, she uses rhythms as a lens to understand urban spaces, urban practices, etc. So this notion of rhythm is very important. And also good to mention is that she's part of the editor's team of Values for Survival, that is part of the Venice Architecture Biennale. We'll return to this notion, the importance of survival, and also the notion of survival. So what are we talking about when we're talking about survival? Good to have you here. And I am very, am I happy to share this image? It intrigued me immensely, and it scared me a bit. So please explain.
Who saw this image before? Nice. So actually, I chose this image to talk about silence, and you'll get where it comes from. So actually, thinking of apocalypse, also from the perspective of my research, my mind took me to the notion of chaos. You know, chaos is also something referring to a madness state, things out of control, but chaos is also having no order, a state of disorder, anyways. And philosophers who engage with chaos, which I find very interesting, connect to where I'm working at, because they want to talk about rhythms as an answer to chaos. This, like, Deleuze and Guattari are like the main philosophers who do that. And they have this beautiful phrase, from chaos, rhythms are born, or something like that. But we can see rhythms as critical entities. They tie things together, actually. So by doing and redoing things, we establish rhythms. It's also how we see around us, like day and night, the weeks turning into weekends, or work and rest. These are all rhythms. But rhythms also establish relationships. So when we want to connect with someone, we build rhythms with them, or we try to get closer to the rhythms of people that we care about. So, like, also nature is full of very fine-tuned relationships, that rhythms that develop throughout millions of years. Anyways, where I want to get at is actually why I find it's crucial to address in the discussion around apocalypse. Is because if we don't recognize each other's rhythms or rhythms of other species, of humans, non-humans, then we can end up in scenarios like this. And what is that? What do we see there, actually? Let's think about the lockdowns that we faced. They were quite difficult for all of us, right? We can actually see that they were just non-rhythm interventions to whatever happened. They were just like these top-down things that stopped everything. And what we had as a result was silence. Again, referring to this image of silence. And silence is also very anti-chaotic in a way, but it gives us an image of apocalypse. So when we're thinking about the lockdown, many people referred it to as apocalypse. And also this housing state, it's in a way, it represents silence, it creates silence because it did not recognize the context at all. It's just a project that was built to, and you can see how immense it goes. Well, I'm showing there, but you can see there. It just goes on and on. It was built to sell land to foreigners, basically. And anyways, what I'm getting at is, so we're here as a crowd of designers, architects, researchers. And I want to say that we can also create silence by not recognizing a context, by not recognizing rhythms, as we can see in this example. And maybe I just conclude there, because I think I just keep on talking. And yeah, we can talk about silence and survival, how we can tackle that maybe later in the talk, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe one thing, so I think this is also quite uncanny. So there is something, yeah. Is this something that you feel too when you, one of the reasons for sharing this image? So you mentioned silence, but isn't it also, I don't know, lifeless or uncanny? It's like, yeah, is that not part of the...
Yeah, that's what I meant actually. It's silent, it's also silencing in a way. And yeah, it is of course uncanny, but yeah, that's also, that's why I wanted to show that as apocalypse, because it gives that uncanny feeling. Yeah. Well, yeah, also that it's fairy tale housing, but then, you know, it's
so the end of the fairy tale.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Then we turn to Roy Bender. Welcome to you too. So assistant professor of critical design, also here at Delft University. And you're also a fellow of Urban Future Studio at Utrecht University. So very much engaged with the future. Yeah, this is one of many possible futures, quite a bleak one. And author of, amongst others, Interactive Media for Sustainability. We will touch upon sustainability, I think. But for now, I would like you to say something, where's my clicker, about the image that you chose.
So, thank you very much for inviting me. The timing is uncanny with the publication of the IPCC report. So, hopefully we're staving the apocalypse and not just welcoming it. But yeah, this is the last page, almost the last page from a book by Dr. Seuss called Did I Ever Tell You How Lucky You Are? And this might be one of, well, if not the oldest book that I owned, then certainly one of the oldest ones. I think I got it at the age of 4 or so. And the book is set as a dialogue, well, really kind of like a psychological treatment given by this distinguished guru to our hero who needs cheering up, essentially. So the book is a series of vignettes that escalate into worse and worse conditions of despair, with the message at the end being, well, you know, how lucky you are that you're not in that particular situation. So this is, as I said, the last one, and the message here is, of course, well, you know, could be worse. You could have been, you know, a coat hanger left in the middle of nowhere by yourself. And to me, you know, maybe this is the closest that I can think of a representation of the apocalypse, being that the apocalypse is kind of the end of thought itself. You know, we cannot imagine it. It's the end of ourselves as well. There's something really lonely and really desperate about being a coat hanger hanging in the middle of nowhere, all by yourself, left there. But I also want to think, you know, when I think about where we are today, I can't but feel this kind of deep sorrow for a world that we are losing, because even if we get our act together, the climate as we know it now is not coming back for you know, centuries perhaps. Our children and our children's children will not see the same bounty of nature and will get to experience it in the same way. But you know, thinking about this kind of disappearing of self in the apocalypse maybe gives room for some hope. Maybe there's some opportunity in the disappearance of self. Certainly, if you're following Buddhism or and Eastern religions, when the self disappears, there's opportunities for collectivity, for more than self to come along, and where we discover that we're more powerful together. And in that sense, perhaps the antidote for what we're seeing around us now is finding a kind of collective vision of the future that will help us rally around a set of actions and, maybe discover our self-efficacy. So I'm not here for the apocalypse. I'm here to stave it and to maybe offer a little bit of hope.
Thank you. Yes, and I think, of course, we need hope. But I'm wondering, isn't it important also to stay with the sadness of this image and the sadness of what we imagine the future of our children will be?
Yeah, certainly. It's part of the process of healing and action. We have to give time for this as well. For sorrow, and sorrow could be very activating as well when it leads to anger as well. Well, there's lots to be angry about. Maybe we'll talk about that later as well. But yes, we should certainly tend to sorrow and to grief as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and this is also, I don't know, a good way to turn to you, to turn to Naomi Stead, professor of architecture at the RMIT in Melbourne, and also director of the Design and Creative Practice research platform there. And this is something I really like, you're also a critic and a commentator, so also very much in the public debate, which I think is a very good thing for scientists. And I do want to mention so that you're editor of, amongst others, Speaking of Buildings, Oral History in Architectural Research. And I want to mention this also because I hope we will discuss it at one point. So the idea that there are other ways to address architecture through oral history, for example, that normally we tend to conceive as something, I don't know, outdated in a way. Yeah, so thank you. And I'll share the image that you chose. That is also melancholic, I would say.
Yes, this is working. Yes, thank you very much, Javier, and thank you very much, Lisa. I'm really delighted to be here. Could be a grim and gloomy topic, or it could be a very galvanizing one. And I actually hope that it's the latter, because I think, Roy, using your word staving off, I think is absolutely crucial, because I did not invent this expression, but I find it very powerful, and it's the idea that despair is a luxury that we can't afford. And I feel that is, I think that's something that I find really compelling about this conversation, because I guess we're trying not to fall into despair. So this image, it's actually a promotion poster for Lars von Trier, the Danish director Lars von Trier's 2011 film Melancholia. So I don't know who's seen that film, but if you haven't, I really suggest that you rush out and watch it immediately, because it's quite extraordinary. Transcendentally beautiful, really, which is quite surprising for what is effectively a kind of German romantic disaster flick, starring Kirsten Dunst. And this, as I say, is a publicity poster, and it has this devastating line, "Enjoy it while it lasts," which of course has resonance for all of us as we enjoy our current temperate, beautiful world while it lasts. I mean, I myself, for example, obviously I'm coming from Australia and I'm making plans to see the Great Barrier Reef because it's not going to be around for much longer. So this is a practical matter, can we get there fast enough before the next bleaching event? And, of course, when you start thinking about taking your child, it adds a whole other dimension. Maybe we'll come back to that. So I guess my disclaimer is, I'll talk a little bit about Melancholia in a second, but the film, I mean, it's not to fall into despair, but really to think about climate change as the great existential crisis of the moment, which we must fight like hell to stave off as much as we can. However, having said that, does it hurt for us to run a thought experiment, which is, what if the climate scientists were not only correct, but in fact conservative in their estimates? And you know, the end is nigh. What if that was the case? And what would it mean to stare into the face of that kind of apocalypse? And why would you do that? And there is a reason why you would do that, and it comes from the history of human religion and the concept of eschatology. So eschatology, the study or the theology of end times, the theology of the end of days. All of the major religions have an eschatology. It's a characteristic of religions. They have a story about what happened at the beginning and a story about what happened at the end. And I would argue that Melancholia, this film, is a kind of eschatological meditation. The fact that it's so beautiful, though, is what's so unexpected about it. And it shows us that, so I'll give you I'm going to try really hard to not give any spoilers, but basically, the Earth is about to be completely destroyed by a rogue planet, which in fact is a large blue planet, kind of the opposite of the blue marble, called Melancholia. And the characters all behave in different ways in the face of this impending doom. Some of them, of course, are in denial, some are in fear, and some kind of lean into it, if you like, into a kind of meditative state. So we're living at the moment in a kind of moment of omens, a literally ominous moment. So when you see an image of a dead polar bear, it is an omen, it is ominous. It's a sign of the things which possibly are to come. But if you think about what the purpose that eschatology had in religion, it's not that you, and in fact Hieronymus Bosch is another excellent example. The point was that you look at these depictions of hell and then you basically reverse engineer them to be a good and virtuous person during your life such that you don't end up there. So I would argue that films like this and visions of doom are actually important for us to countenance and really stare in the face of what could happen, which is the end of the human race, kind of degradation of the natural world, in order to stave it off, exactly as Roy is saying. And I think Melancholia, the film, is a really interesting way to think through those kinds of questions of eschatology as a kind of memento mori, as in remembrance of the finitude of human life, at the level of culture, the finitude of humankind.
Thank you. And I think it is a good introduction for what I would like to discuss with you first, which is the IPCC report. The one from Monday last and the one from 2 months ago. Because perhaps then Melancholia tells us something about dealing with an end that we're trying to stave off. But the question is, aren't we too late already? And so I would like to discuss that and discuss the idea of the just in time or not in time. So not the latest report, but the one from February 22. In the end, so the famous last words of that report are, the cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. Any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. And as you mentioned, they might have been a bit conservative in their estimates. So, so how to connect the IPCC report to this melancholic knowledge?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I find myself kind of shuttling backwards and forwards between, like staring into the face of disaster in order to try and fend it off. And on the other hand, thinking, okay, well, we need, as a culture, rituals and practices and possibly even religions in order to help us to let go. I think Roy was saying something very similar, to mourn the passage of this thing which, we've loved so much, and to develop kind of mechanisms and ways of doing that. Because, even in the news today, I think it was, or maybe yesterday, they're all blurring into one, there is talk that we've already missed the 1.5 degree target. We've already missed that. Yeah. So, things will be bad. There's no question about that. It's just a question of exactly how bad they get.
Yeah.
And how bad for who? which is, I think, an important question that needs to be asked as well. Reading the IPCC report kind of looks like Edward Munch's Scream picture. Like it's very loud, but you can't hear it. It seems like the discourse is kind of muffled by the need to keep things scientifically stated. And I think it's kind of important to then look at what scientists were doing yesterday, when hundreds of them were actually going out and performing different kinds of actions, civil disobedience, etc. So, you know, in the report, they say what they think science is allowed to say, and at least some of them in their everyday actions are kind of pointing to the sound of the scream that maybe does not come off as loud from the report itself. But, you know, the window is closing fast, but we know about climate change at least for 45 years. And we know it, well, for, for human cause, right, and anthropogenic, at least for that long. There's reasons why we haven't done much. And those reasons are still here today. As we talk about the need to decarbonize, there are different politicians around the world that are calling for drilling more and more because of the war with Russia. So there's kind of a long-term game or you know, in a short-term game. I think the trick is to keep the eye on the future and not necessarily on the tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. I saw you nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, I mean, we know, but I don't think we really know. Because one of my favorite guys, long gone, Gregory Bateson, I'm a bit tired, yeah, Gregory Bateson was saying that to think differently, you have to feel differently. In that sense, what Olafur Eliasson did, for example, with the Weather Project in the early 2000s, it might be perhaps much more important in contributing any different sensing of what the anthropogenic change we're causing to the environment, rather than countless and countless numbers that are thrown as data, let's say, in a report. Because you don't feel anything. I mean, okay, we were reading 2 weeks ago that it's 40 degrees above average the temperature in the poles. So, I mean, it's a devastating thing, but so? So in the sense it doesn't affect you, I mean, immediately affect you. You don't feel the importance of it. And that's why I think, again, similar, connected to the argument that Naomi was making, I mean, melancholia makes you sense the end, in all its diversity, in all its frenziness, in all its different approaches. But once you are sensing it, you are also starting to think differently. And I think, I mean, this aesthetic dimension, and aesthetic doesn't mean visual, aesthetic means of the senses. This aesthetic dimension in discussions of anthropogenic or not, that's also a big discussion, of change in the environment, need to be brought forward much more and much more intensely than just mere reports, you know?
And of course, here lies the irony, is by the time that we feel it, it's too late.
I mean, how can you feel so, when you talk to most of the population, when you tell them 1.5 degrees, and they're like, so fucking what, you know, like, how can, I agree with you, like, how can you feel it, you know, it's so complicated, eh? Like, you have to be on that spot to understand, okay, oh man, there's an agriculture here, you have to be in Africa to actually start to feel it, you know, like, or in some of these places, you know. If you are here, it's always raining anyway, you know, so.
But that's why I was mentioning that it's a discussion, or it could be, from my perspective, a discussion on who is actually producing sense. I mean, now sense is produced by what we can call the cultural industry, okay? And it's produced in a very at least monothematic, even if it's not only, but it's monothematic. It's Western, full on. I mean, it's coming with its own, let's say, with its own ambitions, assumptions, with its own, let's say, with its own exclusions as well. Could we produce sense differently so as, for example, to sense what's coming or what is already here? Because if we don't sense it, I don't think all these discussions will remain at a rhetorical level. Or worst case, it's going to be this pop pointing of fingers in this pop manner that what was a movie that was famous around Christmas. They don't look up that kind of exclusion. That I mean, you know, this pseudo-intellectual, we are so good, the rest of the plebs are causing the problems, you know. Because that was more or less the message of the movie, and that's why everyone liked it, because it was making everyone feel good about themselves. And I think this should be recaptured, the production of sense, in order to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah. From that perspective, I'm wondering if this notion of the apocalypse might not be problematic in itself. So I'm thinking now of an essay by Joanna Zelinska, a philosopher, and she argues that this idea, and now we also tend to the notion of the Anthropocene, that I think is important. She argues when we think in terms of the end of man, or the end of the world, or the Anthropocene, so the question is, so whose world, what end, etc. So she suggests what she calls a feminist counter-apocalypse. I'll leave the details, but I want to touch on one notion that's part of this counter-apocalypse that I think might be important, the idea of precarity and also shared precarity and finding ways of getting in touch maybe with feeling precarious, because indeed, 1.5 degrees, I don't feel it, but of course there are people elsewhere who very much feel it. So,
I promise I'm not going to speak for the next 15 minutes. But that's another thing, you know, I mean, the notion of environmental change, it's also something that is produced, and it's produced in Europe, and it's produced with a certain, let's say, a certain background, a certain history, which has to do with agriculture. So the fact that we've broken down, I mean, everything is artificial, but I don't want to go to structuralism now. But the fact that we've broken down the year to 4 seasons, more or less, it's something that has roots in agriculture. And it's been sedimented and popularized and became part of our culture in Europe, okay? With all that comes with Europe. Good and bad, mostly bad most of the times. There are other cultures, like what you might be describing here, that have nothing to do with change in that sense, understand the environment and ecology and climate in a much more complex way, where there's no seasons, for example, or where seasons are much more short, intense, and they vary in a much more different way than our own very canonical 4 per year. So even the very notion of 1.5 degree lower or upper or whatever, it is something that even if we were to sense it differently, it would mean very different things to each one of us. We should not even, we should not canonize it. That's what I'm trying to say. We should proliferate all the different senses of it in order to make sense of it. The Aboriginals have a totally different understanding of climate than we do.
Also more than 4 seasons.
Funny, I want to go back a bit to the melancholia part. Who is your hero?
In the film?
Yeah.
Kirsten, of course. But I mean, I suppose the thing about this film, which is interesting, which I didn't mention earlier, is that she has a major depressive illness, which somehow enables her to, because I guess the thing about major depressive illnesses is that you're always anticipating the apocalypse. You know, it's like the expectation of catastrophe is always there on a daily basis. So when the worst does happen, it's what was simply expected anyway. So, and in the film, you know, it's the Justine character, played by Kirsten Dunst, who develops these rituals, makes it possible to kind of move into this next, to death, basically, the annihilation. So, and why do you ask?
Should we train the elf students to be depressed in a way? Is that the way to keep them like in good shape?
No, well, clearly not.
Instead of, yes, he's bored, we will solve it?
No, but I suppose the thing is, we can't be depressed because we've got to solve it, right? It's unthinkable to have any other...
No, but that's interesting, because earlier you said we don't need despair, so we need to stave off despair. This is important. And I do think that Kirsten Dunst, indeed, she's not despairing in any way, but she is depressive. So how can we get a feel for this? So so what's she doing right? Maybe involuntary, and yeah.
Is she a stoic, Stavros?
Maybe she is.
Well, it's funny because the argument on melancholia and the way that you're also asking the question of your favorite character, which I knew it was going to be more or less the main character, and that's what I understood from your presentation. It is indeed connected with Stoicism, but her form of depression, But Stoicism, it's misunderstood philosophically. There's a very nice essay by Foucault on the care of the self, where he speaks about the Stoics, and he's saying that the Stoicism eventually is a philosophy of time. It's not just I let everything happen to me. It's not this passive caricature we have in mind. It's a philosophy of time in the sense you're continuously preparing yourself for anything that might happen, good or bad. So when it happens, you are reacting to it ethically. Ethically means you don't start cheering for no good reason, neither you collapse under the weight of something that happened to you. You're continuously preparing.
No hysteria.
And, sorry?
No hysteria.
Yeah, I don't like the term hysteria. It's connected with some...
hysteria.
Yeah, hysteria. Yeah, I don't like the term because it's coming from Freud in a very, let's say, sexist manner. So that's why I try to avoid using it. So overreacting, exaggerating anyway, means most of the times not having having had the capacity to prepare in advance for what's coming or for what could be coming. So Stoicism is a continuous thinking of potentials, of possibilities, of worlds that could come.
Could you extrapolate that to an education for urbanism?
Yeah, but I think that's what education is. Education is a continuous leading out. Educare in Italian, I was going to say Italiano, as if in Italian, educare means to lead out, etymologically, lead out of somewhere. So education is leading out of the comfort zone, of the current, and speculating about things that are not in front of you.
Sorry, I think Roy really
And
wants to
certainly
say
if we're
something.
thinking about lifelong education and not just something that you do for a few years in school and then go out into the world. I find the discussion about Stoicism really interesting because, as I understand it, the point is to be virtuous, right? And this is something that does come a lot in discussions around the climate crisis, and certainly has to do with precarity and the question of who's suffering. There's calls for everyone to be virtuous in particular ways, right? And those ways are not equal, all right? Those, we hope that the rich maybe would not fly to space because, in the 11 seconds that they go to space per capita, they emit more CO2 than a billion of the less emitters of this planet spend in a lifetime, right? So 11 seconds. Right, so we ask them to be virtuous in particular ways, but of course, God forbid, not taxing. And then we ask everybody else to be virtuous, please recycle, that's going to save the world, right? And we don't always ask those in positions of power to be virtuous in ways that actually are accountable to the common good. And I think that's why Stoicism maybe is a good and a bad example at the same time, because the Stoic is focused on individual virtue. So, he will do what's right for them. And I think at this point, we should start thinking outside of what's good for individuals.
Yeah, so I would like to, turn to you also and inquire, so how does this relate to this project, this Values for Survival project that you're working on right now? Is there, how is there room for virtues like this or values? So how does it tie in a way?
Sorry, I got a bit silenced because I got very depressed from this whole conversation. I don't know if everybody has that, but wow. So we're actually agreeing that there is no way back, and we just have to build rituals and practices to get along with the pain that we're going to
Melancholia.
face, which is interesting. But I just got depressed. But yeah, Values for Survival. It already is completed. It took place in the context of Venice Biennale 2020. And where the theme was, how can we live together? So the answer of the Dutch pavilion was, who is we? But then the research programming around it suggested, let's think about values actually in terms of how can we live together in creating this common ground. And what happened there is that there were around 13 projects that took place, and all had the context of Venice. So we engaged with the local context, based on global issues, of course, because we tried to that. And we had local experts from Venice, and it was a special program because it took place completely online, so people who were part of the teams, they never met each other, but they established this trust relationship through which also these creative ideas came out for the issues that we faced. So, for example, the images that Javier was showing at the beginning, it made me think about, actually, we could make exploratoriums to reflect on that. But the main value that we actually found there, so every team had to reflect on also the values about the issues that were studied. It was actually the value of creating a common actions together, common practices, common rhythms, and through that actually work towards solutions. So how do you engage with the context? How do you engage with each other? There was a lot of questioning around that. So actually maybe finding nice productive cooperations can also be a way to go around it instead of nothing, just that, basically.
Yeah, but then what if there is, what if there are power imbalances and etc.? Because if I understand you correctly, Roy, you argue, okay, so you might need different virtues when you're very rich than you need when you're very poor, right?
Well, it
not what you
depends
said.
to, you know, the kind of maybe religion or worldview that you have, whether everybody should be equal, you know, and under what terms. But something that Pinar said really kind of lit up for me. The question of who is we, I think, is a really important question. That
I didn't say that.
No, but you
That's
said
the
that.
Dutch Pavilions thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I
didn't
know,
say
but
that.
came from what you
Yeah,
said.
that's-
Yeah. No trademark. Yeah. One of the things that I am a bit hopeful about is that we are answering the question who is we in different ways than we did before. I think there's a lot more attention now to kind of entanglements of humans and non-humans. We're discovering sentience and all kinds of things. From I just read that mushrooms are communicating today. Trees, you know, the work of Suzanne Simard in British Columbia. Octopuses are much more intelligent than we think. We're discovering forms of intelligence in places that maybe we didn't think are there before, and that I think really helps to decenter the kind of you know, sense, like the modern sense, essentially, that we are exceptional, that everything, you know, the world should bow to us. You know, once we start thinking instead of humans and non-humans as Terrans, perhaps, right? And this is a term I'm stealing from Eduardo Viveros de Castro, right? So all those who live on the land, not just humans or non-humans, which in a sense maintains the distinction that we're trying to get rid of. So if we start thinking about a shared future for all Terrans, then maybe there should be shared virtues as well. Then maybe what we expect from a chicken or from an octopus or from a tree or from Jeff Bezos should be more or less the same.
Yeah.
Difficult, no?
I think we should, we'll get back to this, but what I would like to do now is get a feel for what got us into this mess. And then we return to the question of who's the we and the human, the non-human, etc. Because I ask you all not only to share an image, but also to share an article or text, something to give me a feel for, I don't know, your work and also the apocalypse, in relation to the apocalypse. And what I found interesting was that there seems to be, I don't know, critique of modernity. I think modernity could be considered, I don't know, in a way, synonym to the Anthropocene in a way. So the time of modernity is the time of what we now call the Anthropocene. And then I thought, who is a great critic of modernity who also has an image that I can share? And that's a German philosopher, Walter Benjamin. And in one of his writings on the concept of history, this is from 16 short statements, thesis on the concept of history. And I think this one is from the... in the 9th thesis, this is what he writes. He writes about this painting. And he writes, there is a painting by Paul Klee, called Angelus Novus. An angel is depicted there who looks as though he were about to distance himself from something which he is staring at. His eyes are opened wide, his mouth stands open, and his wings are outstretched. The angel of history must look just so. His face is turned towards the past. Where we see the appearance of a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe, which unceasingly piles rubble on top of rubble and hurls it before his feet. He would like to pause for a moment, so fair, to awaken the dead and to piece together what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has caught itself up in his wings and is so strong that the angel can no longer close them. The storm drives him irresistibly into the future to which his back is turned, while the rubble heap before him grows sky high. That which we call progress is this storm. Very apocalyptic also, I would say. Very critical, of course, of this forward pulse of modernity. I'm wondering, so do you agree? Is this what got us into this specific apocalypse? And then what are the, I don't know, what are its characteristics? So how did we get there? How are you piling rubbish upon rubbish? Yeah, you're. I don't know. It seems like you're both sad and laughing at the same time.
I like Walter Benjamin, so this resonates. It's a good example of how I think all philosophy starts with art. Ultimately, when we look at the prima cosa, we always end up with something that an artist has come up with. Maybe something to talk about later, the role of art in getting us out of this mess. It's not one thing that got us into this mess. That would be such a reductionist way, right, to look at the complex world that we live in. But one thing that I want to kind of maybe pull apart here is that, to stick with the metaphor, the angel of history has no control over where he's going. And one thing that actually is part of the modern constitution is a desire to control, is a desire to master, whether it's to master nature in or through technology, whether it's to master the behavior of other people, whether it's to master our own emotions and not to show certain things at some points, right? And there's that kind of impulse is one of the things that I think that maybe we need to let go and maybe open up a bit more to uncertainty, to maybe embrace the fact that we don't entirely know what might happen. The window might be closing, the window might not be closing. The scientists may have been too lenient, or maybe a deus ex machina will jump out and save us all. I don't know. Maybe Elon Musk is working on something in his bat cave. I don't know. But this kind of opening up, I think, to uncertainty, to the fact that we don't entirely know what there is, and actually finding courage in that. Not being optimistic or pessimistic, as Rebecca Solnit, the American writer, writes, but to be hopeful and to be realistic. Not to be a dreamer in that sense, but to really be open up to change. Maybe what we want is the angel to kind of flip around, right? And there is rubble in the back, but what's coming ahead?
Yeah, I saw you nodding a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I really associated what you said, because first you said the desire to control. And I sent a text about assemblages, agency of assemblages, to question sort of the human agency in whatever is happening around us. And human agency, it always brings a system of control. It always creates structures. We're all about creating structures. Also at this faculty, infrastructure, structure, architect. It's a controlling mechanism in a way. But how do you leave space for uncertainty? I found that a beautiful question to ask, because we did go through many uncertain times, and we all found a way to go around it, I guess, like during the pandemic and stuff. I guess there are many lessons learned. Maybe that can also create a reflection. So how we went about it can also shed light to what we can do, also in terms of the ritual and practices we need to build, because I think that's what we need to work on now, which is beautiful, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a little bit outside of the super philosophical part, because for me, modernity is much connected to the history of architecture as well. And what we learn from when we are studying architecture is we have to do modern architecture, no? And the whole project of modernity is always the good side, It's the good guys are doing modernism, like only later you are like, but wait a minute, was it also modernity the one who created the colonization of the Americas and destroyed everything and did the genocides and blah, 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 and created St. Petersburg from scratch with thousands of people dead? That's also modernity. So, I don't know, it's a bit, we want to forget that, and many historians of architecture, they actually, like Frampton or Benevolo, they actually say that, no, modern architecture has a social agenda. We should use it to create justice in the world, and never look at the dark side of that history of modernity, So at the violent side of it. So I'm curious of what this could bring to us. Can we change our mind about the violent side of modernity?
Yeah. So perhaps we should salvage certain parts of modernity and let go of the rest.
No.
No. I would like to learn why, but we'll turn to Naomi first.
It's so interesting because, of course, I've read and heard that quote from Benjamin so many times. But, hearing it now, I'm kind of seeing it in a different light, seeing it through this frame. And, yes, I mean, I think that the angel of history is being blown backwards and can't see where he is going. And it's the storm of progress that is blowing him backwards. And yes, concepts of mastery and dominance of, and also extractivism from the natural world, leading to a kind of accelerationism is, as you know, these kinds of comportments or dispositions towards how we might use the world to our ends are clearly part of the problem. So what it strikes me now is that the angel of history is not only being blown in an uncontrolled way backwards, but he's getting faster and faster. You see what I mean? Like, because the concept of Enlightenment progress was really about more and more progress compounding, building upon itself. And that progress would always be improvement, and this could be endless. Like that, this was one of the greatest myths of, you know, Enlightenment notions of progress, that it could be endless, which of course it couldn't be because it was based on extractivism. So, but I think one of the things that's really tricky about those kinds of narratives, that the world will get better, it will be fairer, it will be more equal, it will be more comfortable, it will be more convenient. It is actually very, very hard to wind that back. Because clearly, if we were, you know, if humans were going to live within their means, we have to be less comfortable, things will be less convenient. And I just wonder how many humans are actually willing to do that. I mean, it's clearly necessary, but how do you wind that back? How do you turn the angel of history around?
Yeah.
You don't.
You don't. No, but I'm curious. So you think that we shouldn't salvage everything from modernity? We should be critical and do away with it if we can, make it turn to rubble.
Well, I mean, who cares what I think personally? It doesn't matter. But the thing with modernity and why I have a problem with it is that it's modernity is primarily, I mean, I know Felix doesn't want to go to philosophy, but primarily is a philosophical issue and has to do with the conditions of production. That was modernity was busy with. I mean, how things are produced, okay? It was, I mean, you're simplifying a lot when you call something modernity like that, but let's not go into the details. But what we call modernity dealt with how things are produced, and it provided its own specific account of how things are produced, an account which excluded time. So things were, in a way, imposed. You could impose the conditions of how something would be produced. That's why abstract concepts, such as supposedly good ones, such as justice, are there, but equally atrocities, such as genocides or concentration camps, are also there, okay? Because, yeah, who cares about how things are produced? We just do what we want to do. That's the attitude of modernity, including in architecture as well. The thing is with the angel of history is that the fact that we know about the Anthropocene, the climate change, the apocalypse, let's call it like that, the fact that we know about it and we can even speak about it is possible due to the very same technologies that caused it. So what causes the climate change, let's call it technology, again simplifying, is the very same thing, technology, that makes us document the climate change. So I don't think that there are two sides in there. There is one side. I mean, the same that causes is the same that supposedly could save or at least make us aware. If there is only one side, that means something that is connected with modernity and has to do with the following. Time exists. It cannot be disregarded, as modernity was doing. And more importantly, it's not reversible. There's now, I mean, you're speaking of a window closing. A window to make us what? Stay where we are? Return to a past that's not going to come? I don't think so. So, I mean, I think there's no past to return, neither present to maintain. There is an irreversibility of where things are going, and perhaps, at least that's how I read the melancholia discussion, perhaps we should make amends. And see, are we even worth saving?
That's a really good question. I think well, depends who you care for, right? That's the answer. I think it would be a mistake to forget modernity, in the same sense that maybe Benjamin talks about it. It's a failed promise, and it's good to remember failed promise. It's good to see the ruins and ask for more. I think one of the things, maybe Stavros, that you're pointing to is that modernity confuses the means with ends. So progress becomes an end state and not something that is replaced by something else. And that keeps, you know, the train keeps on going, the machine keeps on producing. Why? for its own sake, right? Perpetuum mobile is kind of like where we're going. It's no longer for satisfying needs. It's no longer for thinking about happiness. It's no longer for thinking about, you know, equity or whatnot. It's just for its own sake, and that means that there's also a logic of accumulation there, right? Which is a problem.
But it's an invention, no? At the end, like it was a kind of European invention at the end. You know, like when the Spanish arrived to Mexico, they were like, "Why are the guys so lazy? You know, like they don't want to work at all. We want to pay them." And they're like, the guys are like, "What money? Why? I don't care. You know, like I'm doing this for something else. You know, like so. It's a lot. It has been a kind of imposition of a project from the Europe to the world. You know, of modernity. So I don't know if we need to go back to anywhere, but I think there might be an alternative way of seeing the world. You know, like. Not by returning to how the Mayas were living or anything, but maybe there's something that is not exactly profit-driven extractionist, whatever. Maybe. I don't know. Am I too optimistic? Yeah, Stavros will say yes.
No, I'm not going to say yes.
No, but I think it's important that, so sometimes the modernity project feels like inevitable or universal in a way. Of course,
it's not universal.
No, of course it's
European.
It's a very European, local phenomenon. Yeah. So, and perhaps that is something hopeful from the IPCC report. I want to squeeze something out of it, that they continuously mention that indigenous knowledge is important as well. So, not just do it the European way. Although, I'm not really sure if.
But we deleted it, most of it. Huh? We delete most of it. I think it's very difficult to find that. Huh? I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't think we can go back to that because this doesn't exist. But maybe something can come out of the discussion. The thing is that we are always saying, for all this table, we assume that climate change is the most important thing. Will you ask the same question and you go to Africa? Will they say that 1.5 degrees is the biggest problem of their life? I don't think so.
Felix, there's over 500 million people in the world who recognize themselves as indigenous, so I don't think that it's entirely deleted or erased. In fact, at least you know, in the world of design, the resurgence of accepting, acknowledging, and amplifying and platforming indigenous ways of thinking about the world, whether it's called, you know, autonomous design or pluriversal design, this kind of movement to decolonize design and to bring in perspectives that maybe have been pushed aside because of the logic of accumulation that has dominated at least a lot of industrial design, right? Value addition by design. It's actually, I think, quite encouraging, and one of the things that gives me hope. We recognize some of the limitations of what we are doing now, and it's the first step in maybe doing something otherwise.
There are 500 million indigenous, which again, I mean, let's discuss what indigenous is, perhaps for another meeting. But the thing is that, I mean, at least that's how I understand what Felix was saying. Their supposed knowledge is not archived. I mean, I'm very brief. I'm very brief and very general in how I'm using terms. By archived, I mean it's not stored, or at least it's not stored in the same ways that we have imposed on almost everywhere around the world, that knowledge, which is eventually, knowledge is memory of
They were killed.
Okay? Sorry?
They were killed, most of them.
Either they were killed themselves, or because they have oral technologies of storing their memories, these never survived. In general, I mean, what I call the archive, and again, I'm generalizing a bit, which is basically ways of storing how things were done in the past. It's also dominated by a very Western Europe, I mean, let's call it Western, not Europe, Western-centric approach, which leads, I mean, there is people like philosophers of technology like Yuk Hui, who is a Hong Kong-based philosopher of technology, that speak about something that it's almost understood as monotechnologism, the same way of monotheism. So there is only one way that things are done, technologically, in a very broad understanding of technology, okay? And that only one way, it's also connected to the previous problem of how we sense things. I mean, if we agree, which is again a big discussion for another meeting, that what we sense is produced by technology, I mean, from the phones to putting glasses on your eyes to see better, these are not given things from nature, these are things that you're producing continuously, supposedly. If there is only one way of doing both the storing of memories of the past, but also the anticipation of the future, then all the indigenous or non-canonical forms of doing so are by definition excluded. That's monotechnologism again. So the question for me, next to the apocalypse, saving or not itself, is how can you diversify these forms? How can you go to what he calls a techno-diversity now?
Yeah, so let's turn to the I don't know, we had a diagnosis and now we're going to the solutions, although this is probably, I don't know, it's a very modern way of thinking.
No, I disagree.
Excuse me about that. No, you disagree?
Yeah, because we have not solved the question of the we. Who are we?
Okay, who are we?
Yeah, that's also your question.
It's not my question. The Dutch pavilion last year is not my question.
No, but if the we is produced and you figure out different ways, diverse heterogeneous ways of production of that we, then in a way you're also responding to the question of the we, you know? I mean, assuming that the we is produced, and for me it's not an assumption, it's a given, the we is produced, the human is produced, technologically produced. The moment that technology came to the fore, the human was produced as a category. Technology, again, not by this or
Yeah,
this.
but the Anthropocene was not created by indigenous people. You know,
Language is the technology.
It's a technology.
Yeah.
Language is written down.
Yeah.
Language is stored somewhere. Language is full on technological. Yeah. And there's different ways to do it. That's what I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to control myself.
Yeah, but so let's turn to these different ways of doing things. So I do want to hear from you. So what would be different, yes, different ways of doing, working with or technology. So this is a back and forth thing, right? It's not like...
Yeah. Again, I don't want to say that I don't... Whenever I'm being asked what to do, I don't respond to this because I find it a very dangerous question. So I'm not going to respond to what is to be done. The only thing I could say is that the first thing that should be undone would be nature itself, the very concept of nature. And there, I was mentioning to Naomi before, Claire Colebrook on a book that it's more or less all about the apocalypse. It's called Essays on Extinction. That's how it's called. She's trying to make a point together with other thinkers like Timothy Morton, who wrote a very important book called Ecology Without Nature.
Yeah.
She's trying to work with these thinkers in making an argument that the very concept, very modern concept of nature is actually harming us in any attempt to save what is to be saved, because it's not, again, putting the problem in its proper terms. The problem is a problem of production, okay? This, which is artificial, supposedly, the phone, is produced. A tree outside is also produced. So it's not a matter of saying what the one could be called artificial, what the other would be called natural, but rather examine the very conditions, the very ways of being produced. If you go to that direction of examining production itself, and you forget the big container called nature, then I think you might have already an opportunity of thinking different ways of producing. I'm not going to say if it's better. It might be even more devastating.
Yeah.
I don't know, but at least it's going to be different from the established one.
Are there ways of production that you're excited by? New ones that look like they might be different?
No, but I could respond by evading again responding, by saying that, for example, I'm following, and tomorrow I'm going to mention it a bit briefly in the research day we're having on inclusivity and diversity, but one mode of production of the self itself, which I'm quite interested in and excited, is one that does not confuse the political with the personal. So one mode of production that already distinguishes the political with the personal, so it does not make what you think it's good to coincide with your comfort zone, but it's pushing you, and by you I don't know what exactly I mean many things. It's pushing you to a process of estranging, getting a stranger to yourself. That's already a mode of production that can at least potentially create something more interesting than the fixed categories, us good guys, them bad guys, or nature good, technology bad, or any kind of binary, you know? So a mode of production that demolishes and abandons binaries, simplifications, that's a very interesting one. How it could come for, I don't know.
I came upon, I don't know, an example I think that could be helpful, something that we could do differently. I think it was in a text of yours. I think this is a notion by Viveiros de Castro, who was mentioned already. So the idea that we should think and act like bricoleurs instead of engineers. So a bricoleur, I think, would be, I don't know, it's bringing things together. You don't have total control. Instead of thinking like an engineer who, of course, has total control. So would that be a way to go about it? So working in terms of bricolage?
Certainly an intriguing way to think about it, and one that would be antithetical to most people who are getting their education and work on this campus, right? Because the engineering way, so identifying a solution or identifying a problem, as complex as it may be, and then striving towards a single solution, is kind of how most of our students are being trained for. There's room for kind of sideways thinking and letting coincidence and letting similitudes and assemblage to kind of put themselves. There's a big challenge here, I think, for design, and something that I'm really excited about. What would design look like without the intentionality of design? So what does design look, when you put seeds, like Roy Ascott wrote before, when you do what the others called meta-design, continuous design, and some work I call it undesign. So essentially putting in the world the conditions for others to make something of it in the way that they want to kind of let go, and maybe this kind of connects to the letting go that we talked about before.
Then leave some openness in there, so
absolutely
to work with. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree, and also there are many examples right now, like at the city of Amsterdam, like the participatory design, or like design thinking, and like engaging citizens in design. So this, I don't want to call it undesign per se, but creating openness in the design process. It is really, tools that many are exploring right now. But but this notion of bringing things together and how to assemble and what to assemble, I think that still remains as a question. But I was thinking about like literature on care, for example. It also talks about engaging things together. It questions what you bring together. Like even Anna Morimol says the notion of interesse. It means like putting it into context in such a way that it becomes interesting, so you can think of new notions. And but I think that way of thinking doesn't yet exist in design, like complexifying things so that you can create new solutions, I guess. I will.
Yes, I was just going to say that, I mean, obviously I'm quite pessimistic, as you can tell, but one thing that I am optimistic about is the role of creative practitioners, broadly speaking, including designers. The unique role, I would say, that may, emerge, the role that may be able to be played, precisely because of this openness to the unforeseen, uncertainty, risk, incommensurable variables, the ability to hold contradictory things at the same time, and to synthesize things which seemingly cannot be synthesized, which does happen in the creative process. So it seems to me that as well as the ability to dream new worlds into being, really, which is what designers do, and show others what those worlds could be, literally show them through visualization. So this actually seems to me to be quite a hopeful possibility. And it comes from our disciplines, because I think the idea of the bricklayer, not the engineer, is a really interesting way of putting it, because I suspect there's a kind of closet positivist hidden in many people, sometimes even designers, certainly in engineers. It's not even closet in engineers, but this notion that there can be a linear process taking us from a question to an answer. But design as a kind of heuristic process is not so linear and can show other alternative ways. So I've been involved in a little bit of research in the Australian context about, redesigning architectural education in the face of, the necessary changes in relation to zero carbon economies, climate change, amelioration, abatement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there is an enormous amount of hope and optimism amongst architecture students and staff that, in fact, even though the built environment is such a large part of the problem, we can also really be part of whatever partial solution, if I may use that word, in scare quotes, whatever we arrive at. I think design and creative practice actually has a crucial role to play.
Yeah, and I want to turn to something that you said in the beginning. So it also has to do with the ability to to live with ambiguity in a way, or paradoxes, or some things that just don't really fit. And perhaps this is a good moment to turn to, I don't know, the personal or the the personal final part of this discussion. Is this perhaps something that we also have to learn on an individual level? So knowing that you cannot do it exactly right, that you cannot know exactly what's going on, what you should do, etc. Do stuff that you might later think is, I don't know. For example, you coming over here from Australia by plane. This is something, I don't know, it's painful, right? Or it's painful, but you did it anyway. And this is something that you bear, or that you, so along these lines, is this helpful? Is this something that we should learn to do in the apocalyptic 20s?
Say that again?
Is this something that we should learn to do in the apocalyptic 20s and onwards?
Yes, yes. Learn to hold ambiguity, do you mean? And hold the uncertainty of how to be in the world? Yes, I don't think there's any choice.
Yeah. No, and also tying into to an article, the article that you sent me, that was about, is it morally, I don't know, is it moral to bring children into this world now, to have children? But it sounds like, I don't know, it's a very, in a way, a very harsh or black and white question. So I was wondering, as, I don't know, some kind of counter question, don't we need room for ambiguity there?
Yeah, absolutely. I had an answer and I've forgotten what it was. Oh, I know. Just to go back to, this is a kind of pragmatic answer to a complex question. But thinking again about this research we've been doing about climate literacy amongst architecture students and academics in Australia, one of the great enemies of change and rapid change is the notion that there is a right way to do it and we've just got to find it. Because there's kind of furious disagreement about what is the correct path forward. There's furious agreement that something has to change, but there's furious disagreement about exactly what that is. And this is because people are looking for the right way forward and pausing, the so-called analysis paralysis of, but we're waiting for the right way forward. But in fact, it will be necessary to kind of slowly move forward in a cloud of ambiguity and doubt, because otherwise you just, the change just won't happen.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like there's an urgency, no? So there's an urgency, but at the same time, are we going to make the same mistakes of modernity? Like, okay, we have to solve climate change. Okay, let's do it immediately. And everybody's like, but how? This is what you're saying, no? Like, so do we have the time to actually think about it? Do you have the time to actually open it? The engineers and the scientists say, it's a political thing? Can we make it political? Is it okay? We have to make it political, no, at the end. And we might choose the wrong, like, as I was just telling to Javier, like, in France, they don't care about these topics for the right-wing guys. For them, the problem is that there's more, they call it, the big displacement, how they call it, the population, like, basically, white people being replaced by people of color. This is the biggest problem for the right-wing people in France, which are going to vote this week, so not everybody agrees that this is the main problem, first of all.
But then we return to the problem of the we again, right? So it has to be political, and there has to be conflict, and etc. Because
yes, there has to be conflict.
Don't all want the same things. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you go to also probably an indigenous community,
and for good reasons, mind you.
Yeah, they will say, "But who are you, and who told you that we should not cut more trees here?" Like, again, who are you? What is your agenda? No, but we already have the papers that says that 1.5 degrees. Yeah, but who are you? Like, I don't know.
Especially after you deforested Europe in the last 1.5 years to create the
It's
Western
so difficult to have a moral stance, like say, no, but we did it wrong ourselves, yeah. And hello, I mean, just the world just sees, like we are so dependent on gas still.
That's again part of the gridlock though, because on the one hand, for example, the very same French people, not the right ones, supposedly even the sensitive ones, are supporting or were supporting 3 years ago when French army was going to the Amazon in order to control the fires there, which were not fires that happened. I mean, the farmers put the fires, and it's a process that they do quite often. It might have gotten out of hand, and I know. I'm not going to go to the details. But again, I find it a neo-colonial attitude to send the French army to control the fires in the Amazon. Again, big topic, we can discuss it another time. But the grid that I'm referring to is that I suppose that these farmers or these people, let's say, in supposed developing parts of the world, should have been given the chance, which I don't think they're aware of, to exploit whatever we can call of their environment with their own technologies. Again, I'm very broad in the sense of technology, rather than imposing them the same devastating ones that we destroyed, let's say, the north and western part of the world. So we are giving them this because it's part of our means of production. We're making money out of it by selling all the technologies and exporting them there. And simultaneously, we're complaining about the fact that they're destroying the other part of the planet that's sustaining us. So it's not, if I'm paraphrasing Zizek, who paraphrased Jameson, it's not a coincidence that we can easily discuss the apocalypse and imagine it, but none of us can imagine the end of capitalism. That's what Zizek was saying, attributing it to Jameson. We all can think of a world, but we cannot think the end of capitalism. And I have a response to that, because we have all dreamt of extinction. Melancholia is one example. We have all dreamt of the end. But none of us have ever desired to stop desiring. The economy is a discussion on desire. How we desire, what does our desire bring forward? It brought the apocalypse or the change of the climate. It brings other things as well. And if we don't put it on the level of desire, we are not gonna, I mean, we're gonna keep on having the discussions, but they're not gonna lead somewhere.
Yeah.
But there is this, I'll get to you, but I just want to point out this great meme, another end of the world is possible. So this ties in, and it's in English and in Spanish and in, I don't know, French, of course. I just want to mention it's a great meme to think through at another point in time.
Yeah, exactly, that's what Colebrook is writing about. It's these other ends of the world, not other ways to save it, other ways to end it, which are equally, anyway, let's leave it here.
Demand choice in all aspects of life, right? As a good consumer, that's how you know you're in a good place. I think it's a really interesting point about desire, and it comes to the question of, that was raised here before. What are we trying to save anyway? A world without desire, is that a world worth living in? The question is, what is the object of desire, and what does it make you do when you pursue the object of desire? A desire is a very natural thing, just like ambiguity and living with ambiguity. We all do it all the time. The question is, how do we cope with it when it becomes too painful, right? And so I think there's a question of ethics here. And when you ask Naomi, how does she feel about flying here? Well, it's a long swim, so what's she going to do? But the question, when we pose that as a question of individual ethics, I think we're missing out the real question, which is, why are there 10 flights a day? Why are there 10 flights a day from Australia, and why do they cost only 1,000 euros? Isn't that the question? So, if we are to open the world to ambiguity and to the plurality, and if we realize that ethics and morals have something to do with our view of the world, and we want to allow people to have different worldview, then the hard work of politics is to reconcile all of that into something that staves the apocalypse, without erasing those differences into some kind of a benevolent dictatorship. Let the billionaires tell us what we need to do, and no.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. No. I think it's time to turn to you also for questions, or is there something very pressing?
I thought you were going to go the personal way, but I thought that's it. No more personal thing.
We have till 8, and so if there's not loads of questions, then we can touch more upon personal stuff. I imagine there is there a microphone, or is it just? Yeah. So is there someone who would like to come down? Just think about it, and then in the meantime I want to know about your personal stuff.
I want to go personal, because let's say, forget you, but I am a hypocrite, and this is like, it's impossible to make any sense of it, like any sense of it, like we try to teach agriculture sustainable, but then I go home and I want to eat my pata negra of these pigs who have 1 hectare, you know, like how can we possibly actually achieve happiness and at the same time be sustainable? I don't really know. I mean, seriously, can someone answer this? You know, like, it's really impossible. We are junkies. Like, we are totally junkies of comfort, of everything. Like, are we gonna go back to, we did one studio and it was not with you, but we did a studio called Austerity in the Y Factory. And it was actually, okay, we don't have anything, so how can we do this live? So we make this model of how the city will look like, and then Vinny showed it in Paris, and people were really upset with him, like, austerity? What is this? You are like a neoliberal. No, we wanted to imagine another world without all the resources. It was considered an insult, like we cannot let it go. And I'm junkie at least, I accept it.
I can give an example of I don't know, austerity on a personal level and then getting happy because of it even. So at one point I found, I think this is 6 years ago already or 7, that I was just, I don't know, kind of addicted to buying clothes. Why? I don't need them. So then I just, I wasn't allowed to buy clothing for a year. Only I think, no, I actually bought, I don't know, socks and panties, I don't know, up front. So I didn't buy anything for a year. And this changed everything, because now I'm just not addicted to buying stuff anymore. It's just gone. Well, that's not really true. I must be wary, because when I buy stuff from, I don't know, before you know, you go down dangerous paths. But, and I'm quite sure, yeah, of course you're quite right, we shouldn't be focused too much on the individual level and focus on the systemic stuff and changing things there. But I do think that on a personal level, I don't know, trying stuff out does help.
Yeah, there's certainly room for individual ethics. And we make choices all the time, and we should be able to look ourselves in the mirror and you know, and live with ourselves. But
absurdity will appear at some point.
Pardon?
At some point, absurdity will appear.
Of course. Of
course,
but it's not terrible. It's part of the human condition as well.
Minutes, no?
Yeah. I think we're bombarded with images of consumerism from a very young age, and we're essentially brainwashed to think that we are incomplete unless we purchase something. And in that sense, it's very much a religion. It's like, you know, the role that God is playing now. Consumption is, and you know, if we're kind of interpolated into these kind of structures, it's really hard to break away, and people break away in different ways, right? But I also want to point out that there's a real important question of language here. You call it austerity, it's terrible, right? You call it self-sufficiency, it sounds really great. If you talk about frugality, well, depends on which side of the line. You know,
how about autarky?
What's that? Autarky? It's fantastic. What do you mean?
Or fantastic or terrifying?
No, I think it's fantastic, because it raises for me, it raises a specter of autonomy as well, right? The ability...
Which calls like the soil and the identity and the pride. I don't know, it's also scary.
It's scary if you think that to be autarkic means that it's just a single self. But if a community is autarkic, then it sounds entirely different. So again, it's where you put the scales and the boundaries around, you know, the terms and the use of language. But, you know, there's a culture war, and not the one that everybody talks about, you know, being woke or not being woke and canceled or whatnot. There's I think, a culture war around how much political we're willing to be.
And I think we have an actual question from someone.
Hi, thank you very much for the wonderful discussion. It kind of resonated with me, because I feel like I've been grappling with a lot of these you know, questions on like, you know, do we really need this? And kind of, I think the broader question here is greed and gluttony for me. So I think I'd like to frame the question here with regards to my position as a student of architecture here, and with regards to the wider faculty. Now, our role as designers is very much based on the need, on, like, you know, people coming to us and saying, I want this, I want that, right? How should we respond to that?
That is a great question.
Well, I mean, it's sorry, yeah, okay, I jumped in. But it's a question of, I mean, you say I want this, I want that, it's a question of desire. So I think again, there's no single response of how you should do it. I mean, you would find the way to do it. And anyone that's going to tell you that this is the way to do it, be wary of them. So in finding your own way of doing it, I mean, if you analyze desire in a way that it's not, because the story that you were saying that since we're young, I mean, we're seeing things and we're trained to be consumerists, etc., etc. I understand, but it leaves us a bit out of the picture, as if we're like little angels that are being trained to be bad guys in the end. And that's a conclusion you get if you understand desire only as something personal, you know, only as something Freudian libidinal, as if it's something that stems out of you. But desire is both personal and non-personal simultaneously. It's both yours and collective simultaneously. The moment that you have a Mac, you're also desiring the very, I mean, oppressive production that comes with it, you know, the very conditions that make it, which are conditions of exploitation. That doesn't make you good or bad. That makes your desire be invested in something much bigger than you, and the moment it gets out of you, also being rechanneled back at you. So you are part of it. You cannot be part, I mean, outside of it. So in the question of your client of what do you want, I mean, or if he tries or she tries to respond to what do they want, I think one important thing to have in mind is that they never want an object. So there's nothing such the object of desire. What you were after when you were buying clothes, obsessively or not, was not just the red, the red dress or the black shoes. It was everything that was coming with them. It was the sense of them. It was the sound of the shoes. It was how others would look at you. It was how would you feel in them. So this how would you feel and how would you be felt is something that most of the times is not included in a discussion of economy. Either economy of a libidinal level of my desires, or economy of a broad social level, economy of factories and modes of production. If you unlock the relationship between how what one wants is produced collectively, and the same moment that it's produced collectively, it changes that one, if you unlock in your own way that thing, then you're perhaps more able to respond to them, I would say.
Okay.
Can I follow up very quickly?
Yes.
But the thing is, what we are generating in the form of these questions that arise from, okay, what is it that you want, is a very tangible product that has a very, tangible impact on the material resources that we have. So should we perhaps be moving towards some more intangible propositions to our clients?
I think one is designing experiences. So how you break them intangible and intangible, I would ask you back, what do you mean intangible? What's an example of an intangible?
Good question.
Do you mean like a provocation? Is that what you mean? Like a critical provocation?
I think so, yeah. I think much more, I'm really not sure because in my head it's still quite abstract, but something I guess that doesn't deal so much with physical resources. I don't know. Yeah.
Like the metaverse, you mean?
Yes.
Something
no, but that still has an impact.
I guess something more social, right? You mean something social, something that's not a building maybe sometimes?
I don't know, but maybe I'm hinting more towards, questioning the position that the client is coming from, for instance, like what kind of philosophical background are they coming from, how maybe that needs to be redressed in some way. Is that even the job of a designer to do such a thing? Yeah.
I'm thinking of the dress, but anyway. No, not your dress, but. No, but yeah, I don't know. I think could be a challenge for designers to actually not not ignore the questions and actually to say, well, she wants to have 10 dresses per week. What can we do actually to make 10 dresses per week which don't damage the environment? And that's the brief. And okay, but we were discussing with Javier, is technology the only thing that's going to solve it? I don't know. That's another question. We are also saying, okay, she wants 10 dresses per week, so either we change the ethics or we invent some material that whatever is self-producing. I don't know. There's these plants, no, that they eat themselves, no, but it took them some millions of years to arrive there. But I don't know. Can we invent something like that? Maybe. Yeah? That was another story we want to do with the Y Factory. What if there's no scarcity of energy? What if there is no problem? There's no faculty? We need problems, no?
I was just going to say I mean, it's a kind of classic conundrum, particularly for architecture students. Like, where is the line? What kind of job would you not take? You know, would you refuse to design a prison? Would you refuse to design a detention center, immigration detention center? Blah, blah, blah. You know, I could go on and on and on. But I think there is often, I mean, sometimes it's easy to see the ethically correct thing to do, and sometimes it's not. So, for example, imagine you were, as an architect, you were approached by a fossil fuel company who wants help to decarbonize. What do? I mean, this is not simple. I think you can't necessarily deal in kind of moral absolutes here, because, you know, it might be a genuine attempt to decarbonize. It might be a genuine attempt to move away from fossil fuels. It might be that, you know, this is could benefit from the work of designers and could ultimately be a force for good. But if it's a binary concept of good and bad, black and white, petroleum company will not work for them, it's not always so easy. I mean, I know you're not suggesting it is always so easy. It's hard.
Yes, another question.
Oh. I'll have to walk out in front so they can. I'll read from. Am I understandable? Yeah. I'll read from my phone because it's a very long question and. Oh, I need to turn around. Oh, I need to look at the camera. Do we perceive the complex artificial system which human beings created as nature, as it produces its own unavoidable events, its own resources, its own problems and crises, which we have to respond to? Can we say, in a way, that this sort of artificial system is more influential to our lives than a natural, conventional ecosystem? And is this the reason why our senses for these natural ecosystems are blunted and maybe less relevant? And in a way, I want to ask, is climate change really our biggest problem, or is maybe a nuclear war our biggest problem? These are questions that are bothering me. Yeah, do you have like an answer?
I think, but then I'm not going to respond because I've spoken too much. I think they're part of the same. There is something that brings the two together, between the climate change and the supposed nuclear war. But I'm gonna, if there is time, I'm gonna speak about it in the end.
I mean, do we need to choose what is worse?
No, you don't need to choose. But I was wondering, because on a personal level for me, it's really hard, even though I live in a society where knowledge is easily accessed, it's really hard for me to think about climate change or natural ecosystems, as like 99% of my life is influenced by the things that other people do, and these almost seem like a new type of nature, because I don't have power over them. I can't say, I don't have power over laws, I don't have power over Jeff Bezos. It's just like nature, because it's something I don't have power over, and it just comes.
Why do you think you don't have power over it?
Over Bezos or
I don't have money. And yeah,
I agree with you. It's so hard to visualize our impact, no? Like, even if you do all the effort, like, what is going to benefit? We're talking of 0.000000001 degree. Like, what? Like, so I want to go back to the collective.
I don't know, the politics was, the importance of, I don't know, the political aspect was mentioned earlier. If I listen to you, and if I listen to you now, it seems like you're buying into the ideology that, I don't know, okay, perhaps we can try and change stuff as consumers, but then when we think about it, we know nothing will change. if we, on an individual level, change our consumption behavior. So then we feel powerless. But there's political action, right? There's always stuff you can do. So the idea that we're only consumers and that as a consumer we cannot do anything is a dangerous fiction, I think. And we need to be wary of it.
I think you have to brainwash yourself like the Stoics, to do things which are virtuous, you know, like, and just by doing that, perhaps we have a chance, you know.
But without going into a big discussion, that's topic for another time. That's my favorite phrase of today. The thing that I implied that connects the two, I'm going to be very brief, it's the state. I mean, nature as a concept was produced sometimes in the second half of the last millennia in Europe. There is also a very specific contract called social contract by Rousseau, in which nature was a bad thing. And the social contract signed among all of us, part of the state, was to protect us from nature. So back then, it was not about saving nature, it was about protecting us from nature. That's how sovereign states were created. So a supposed sovereign Russia, nuclear bombing a supposed sovereign USA, is a product of a relationship with nature. Supposedly the states, either Russian or Dutch or whatever, I mean, I don't know where you're coming from, so your state included, are there to save you from nature. That's why they were created. It's not actually why they were created, but that's where they were being sold upon. That was the story, that we are here to save you, okay? I don't think that you could speak about either climate change or war in general without re-evaluating the state itself. And by re-evaluating, I mean even challenging it. And that's what the figures that are so apocalyptic in their own right, that's what they're doing. Bezos, it's supra-state. There's no state that can control Bezos, okay? Or any other Bezos-like figures. And these figures are even more dangerous, I would say, than the traditional state enemies.
There's another question. Oh, yeah.
I don't know, should I stand? I think I can. Yeah? Okay, yeah, I want to come back. This is work. I want to come back to this role of the creative practitioner. I mean, we're here in a faculty of architecture. There's people from industrial design, from... I think there is a really, really strong task for spatial practitioners. We're dealing with our built environment, and I think it's up to us as architects, as scholars, as educators here, to set that stage and to also to teach our students to care for situations, for resources, to deal with our built environment in a responsible way, to care for communities we design for the people we design with, the people we design for. And I think Naomi was talking about the ambiguity, about uncertainty, about embracing contradictions. This is something that we as designers can do, whether we're architects or industrial designers. And I think this is something that we have a very urgent task to do so, and also as educators to bring that to the fore, to create imaginative visions that are ethical, but that are also poetical. And I think that's, at least that's what I put hope from, is that the way to say, that there is a role for us as creative practitioners and as educators to do so.
Certainly. 100%. I can't agree more. Yeah. There's a lot of work that looks at what art and creativity can do in the way that we think both about the world in different ways, and also imagine, prototype different alternative futures and give us an opportunity to wear them for size, in a sense, right? And to try to be what Ursula Le Guin calls realist of a larger reality. So to break through what we take as given and entertain other options that maybe weren't there on the table before. I think it's a really important role for art, and for art that's engaged with social issues. Not all art is political in that sense, right? There's certainly movements within design, whether critical design, speculative design, and other forms, discursive design. That there's the names just multiply, but they're all trying to do the same, which is to open up the field into thinking about politics and not just about product making. I think we have a really, those of us who are educators, I think it's really important for us to do that. And I can't emphasize enough the question of care as well. I think very much something that came, at least to me, through COVID, right, is the fact that, our welfare depends, both depends on others and on those that we underpay to care for us, right? So that these things, to me, I think are crucial. Any way we choose to address the apocalypse or not, caring for each other is probably a good way to go.
Yeah, for each other and for the earth we live on. I mean, I think this is a very broad concept that we should embrace.
Yeah, I'm also biased, I think, as a designer, as a student of architecture, about thinking about the solutions. And I was also wondering, since you were talking about the state dimension, it's also something that strikes me every time, like to think that there is no place on earth which is not part of a state, which is reassuring and kind of, yeah, strange at the same time.
There is one part, and it's the next, the actual Third World War. It's going to happen for that part, and it's a bit north.
Okay.
In the north. It's disputed by many different states as we speak.
Okay. But anyways, I was wondering, what do you think it's a good scale? It's the good scale to intervene and to change. Is it the territory? What is a territory? Can it be the dimension of the municipality, or?
But that's what I mentioned about the state. That's why I mentioned the state is nothing else but the dominant form of collective organization. I think that no discussion on the apocalypse, averting the climate change, or whatever else, is viable if not also it addresses that dimension, how we organize ourselves collectively. I would not expect the same state, or plural states, that caused that thing to be the ones that supposedly we should rely upon to save us from.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
And yeah, I was wondering about you, but also the other. What do you think then it's the right scale to intervene?
I think that depends of who are you addressing to, because if you are asking humans, again, they will come with a human scale, like a municipality, state, or even a person. But probably if we will give voice to a kind of non-humans, they will say, no, well, we're talking of other dimensions here, so it's really like a kind of corridor or a biological corridor or whatever, like the species who live there. You have to understand what do they think, how do they perform their living, and there's not one answer. If we go back again to one solution, we are going back to the modernity process. Like one single thing. So I really think that we have to move beyond that, but we didn't touch on that. You promised we will, we didn't. So this part of the beyond the human part, I think is super important, because we are always going back to the anthropocentric. You were saying, Stavros, like, can we understand the world not from the human point of view? I don't know. It will take us some time to arrive there. We might, but...
We have one final question. One final question.
So it will be short. Something that I was kind of thinking throughout the discussion. We talked a lot, or you showed in the beginning, the Bosch painting, which ends in kind of hell. And we talked about how we can backtrack from that. We also talked about preparing. Stavros, you were talking about preparing for the apocalypse, about making rhythms that we can prepare. What is more beneficial? Something that I was thinking. What is more beneficial, to think of the apocalypse and backtrack and see what not to do, or to think of positive futures and develop rhythms to get there? And I'm talking in discussion because also in the Y Factory we touch on that a lot. You've made the book City Shock, which talks about scenarios of kind of apocalyptic scenarios, but we also talk about Hong Kong visions where we think about positive futures. So maybe it's the same, but it's maybe a question which is interesting to talk about.
I think there's value in both because they reveal different aspects of what's important. So we should see negative dystopian images, and they should scare the shit out of us, and they should push us to pursue alternatives. But we also need positive images because they will propel us forward and give us something to aspire to, and we need that. There's no movement without a vision, right? So it's hard to align people together if they don't believe that they're fighting for something better. And so there's different work around motivation for behavior change and people take different positions on it. But why are we choosing, right? So to me, like to put it either or means that you're willing to give up half of the strategies available for you for change, and that would have been my short answer to the previous question as well. What scales to work on? All of them. Yeah. All of them. Some will be more effective or not. The question is where you think you're going to be most effective in, right? We can't be choosy.
Yeah, it's like another way of putting your question is it better to have the carrot or to have the stick? And I would say the answer is both, all at once, all the time, because what we're trying to do here is move the donkey forward.
I will just answer to you because we are indeed here, but also we're looking at you because in the Y Factory we have done a lot of exploration of like these scenarios, and I think it would be great if TU Delft, or like not only tries to solve the technological part of things, like how to crack this latest material or whatever, but think of the political side. And with Stavros, we did a study on anarchy, and there's what will it happen if there is not a state, for example? It's just a simple question, and then you explore that, and then you start to understand that there's different ways to arrive to another solution, which is not just working with this typical client, state, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, it might open, fiction can help us, I think, to devise another, or avoiding this apocalypse, And
I think also apocalypse can be a tool to get curious about things again, like to discover new dimensions. Maybe architecture isn't only spatial, it's also time-based, it's also based on history. So there are many different aspects also that we can get curious about just by, reflecting on this. The scales, all scales, but are there also scales that we haven't seen yet, we haven't thought of yet, so yeah.
There are probably loads of scales that we hadn't thought of, sure skills that we haven't addressed here, kind of touched on the non-human, but not too much, maybe next time. I want to thank you all very much for this, great conversation. The apocalypse can be enlightening at least, and kind of invigorating at times, and depressing, of course. Anyways, just a round of applause for Roy, Pinar, Felix, Naomi, and Stavros. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks to you too for moderating.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be listening to you tonight. I'm really happy finally this conversation took place. Thanks again and again. One leaves the room tonight thinking that maybe to the T of TU Delft we should have the P of politics and the P of philosophy. Just food for thoughts. It is my obligation, like every evening, to show you what's coming next. I don't know, I'm always having problems with this. We will have the chance to keep talking about the future of a planet from another point of view, which is the point of view of landscape architecture, landscape architecture education in particular. Next May 3rd, we are organizing an exhibition in collaboration with the Landscape Architecture Department, who's celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Masters. So there will be a new exhibition here, as well as a BK Talks. You are more than welcome to join us then. In the meantime, ADP. Thank you very much.